Is a book review about a book that I have had for about 3 months, and it was written by an author whose books I have reviewed before. And the title of this book is Health Secrets from the Ancient World, and it was written by Dr. John Heinerman, PhD. Now, as I stated, I have reviewed other books by Dr. Heinemann. So far, I have read 2 or 3 of his books, and they usually range between a little over 200 to 400 pages. So this book right here is relatively small. It is approximately 134, 135 pages. Yet, like his other books, it is full of information that you would find helpful, and I did learn a lot from it. I'd have to go back and cross-reference or research some of the things that he mentioned in this book, but other than that, it did pique my interest. It made me look at the human body in a different way, and just open my eyes to other questions that I didn't even know I had. So we're going to go over his biography, which I guess would be an old biography, but I just don't feel like going on the internet and looking up a more recent one. So it says, John Heinerman, PhD, is an anthropologist who specializes in the study of folk medicine. Dr. Heinerman has developed a unique style of writing in which fact and folklore are carefully interwoven to create mosaic readings that are hard to put down. As the author of nearly 30 books on a wide variety of subjects, he has created an international following of several million devoted readers who find his works lively and controversial. If this was not the truest biography I've ever read of him, for real. Because when you go on the internet and you try to look up how to contact him, you can't really find anything. I don't know if he's still doing his medical anthropology or if he's retired. I literally cannot find any more on how to contact this man. And also, the talk about the unique style of writing make his works hard to put down. It is hard to put down because you'll read one story, it'll pique your interest, and you want to read more. And he does tell his findings in a story-like manner. Now, the part about lively and controversial, I think that has to do with his belief system of practicing Mormonism, which also shows up in this book. So I'm going to mention that near the end of this review because I tried to do a little bit of research on Mormonism, and it was just very interesting what I found out. This book was published in 1991 by Cassandra Press, and it starts off with the introduction, which will give the basic summary of this entire book. So let's read that. Ancient civilizations had a lot to offer us in the way of good health rules. Before mankind progressed to city dwelling and pyramid building, people ate better foods, it seems. Ironically, the introduction of agriculture, with its domesticated crops and genetically improved animals, along with the discovery of fire, brought about significant changes not only in the way men and women felt, but also in how they looked as well. But in time, mankind has found out how to treat the wide array of newly acquired maladies. The Egyptians took to the enema, the Babylonians and others turned to herbs, and the Hebrews revolutionized their eating habits with the dietary lists of do's and don'ts. Besides these several remedial approaches, mankind also focused on the philosophical aspects of good health. All of these different approaches are carefully laid out here, and the reader can hope to achieve a more developed and well-being in every true sense of the word. So the reason I got this book is because I meet so many people that talk about just food. They're obsessed with food. They're obsessed with being clean. And personally, I feel that if you're obsessed with food, then you're hungry. If you're obsessed with food, then you're malnourished. Because when you're full, when you're nourished, you're not really thinking about food. But when you are starving, that's all you can think about. Think about when you're hungry and you can't focus on anything, not even with the person talking to you, because all you can think about is, what am I going to eat? What am I going to eat? So I thought that was pretty interesting. He starts off talking about, in the beginning, I guess from an anthropological, is that how you say it, point of view, how our bodies were different. Our bodies were much stronger than they are now because of the foods that we ate. He also implied that agriculture changed how strong our bodies were, how strong our teeth were. The advancements made in tool production were a third factor which helped Neanderthals evolve into more civilized humans. It says, as Stone Age tools of the Mousterian era became transformed into more sophisticated technology in the Upper Paleolithic culture, there was a subsequent disappearance of the typical Neanderthal facial type. Likewise, there was a reduction in tooth size, with greater reliance on tools. When tool refinement reached the point where they became more efficient than teeth for various tasks, then jaw and tooth sizes shrank. He also said, I guess there were longer pregnancies. Now, some people, they wouldn't believe that. Others might have an argument about it. I can't really argue with it because I'm not that well versed in just anthropology, but just from my personal life, just looking at people with my physical eyes, I can see how over the course of time, food has changed people. Sometimes I can just look at a person and I'd be like, they probably are deficient in that, or they're probably eating this type of that, or watching people switch their diet. Watching like how, like on one diet they look like this, and on one diet they look like that. Like me, I was living with a vegetarian. So I was eating vegetarian meals. This was in like 2014. So I was eating vegetarian meals, 3 meals a day. It was good food I was eating. But when I look back at the pictures, I was so frail. I was so thin. I was so skinny. Like, I'm already skinny, but just looking at it, I'm like, no. Now people are like, oh, you're gaining weight. Probably because I'm eating more. I mean, I'm eating at the same rate. I was actually eating more as a forced vegetarian than I am now. But I have more weight on me now than it's kind of strange. But I could see how agriculture could change the human body, because if you're out hunting for food, if you're out scavenging and getting fruits and vegetables and things that are in season and using all parts of an animal, of course, you're going to have a certain shape. Like, most people didn't have gyms back in the ancient world, unless you like preparing for being a warrior, or if you're having like some type of contest. There wasn't a place called a gym that you went to. In most cultures, life was your gym. So agriculture, you're choosing the food. And of course, most of us humans are biased. We're going to grow the foods that we like to eat. It may not be the foods that we need, but we will just be growing them. It's like, I like bread, or I like wheat. I like this. I'm going to grow so much of that. That's why when Dr. George Washington Carver went to the South, he essentially saved the South from destroying their soil, because they kept growing cotton in most places over and over and over and depleting the soil. So popularized the crop rotation and different things. Or he was one of the people that popularized that, because I'm sure it's like goes back to indigenous people. But yeah, I thought that was pretty intense. Also, most people, and I tell this to everybody all the time, most people weren't exposed to that many different types of food. You usually ate the same staple diet that your grandmother and her grandmother and her grandmother ate. You didn't differentiate from or deviate from your diet like that, unless it was a special occasion, like, oh, it's this holy day, we have to eat this. It's that holy day, it's that festival, this is what we're eating. The only time you really deviated from your diet, usually, or had more exposure to other types of foods, from what I have read and come across, is when you lived in a monastery, if you were royalty, because you had like your royal gardens, if you were a merchant, if you lived on a trade route, or if you had exposure to missionaries. And that's probably why people's palate became more diverse, I suppose. They got introduced to foods that weren't in their natural staple diet. So, of course, your body might have a reaction to that. It says the lessons learned from the Neanderthal diet thus far are: cooking affects the human race. Farming of crops yielded more food than that was less nutritious, and tool advancement brought a further refinement in food and overall reductions in jaw and tooth sizes. That's because you're not like, I don't know. It's probably, he says it in here, but I cannot find it. It says, the first reason for this is that hunter-gatherers were used to a very diverse diet, whereas early farmers obtained most of their staples from only several starchy crops. The latter gained cheap calories, but at the cost of bad nutrition. Interestingly, the same thing is being repeated today, where there are high carbohydrates foods, namely wheat, corn, and rice, making up the bulk of calories consumed by mankind, yet each one is deficient in certain vitamins or amino acids. I feel everything is deficient. Everything. Everything we're eating is deficient. You just gotta make the best with what you have, because if you obsess over it, you'll never be happy. You'll just lose your mind in the sauce of health books and different things. That's why when I read these health books, I take everything with a grain of salt so I won't go insane like the people I meet. The curse of cooking. The reader might have noticed prior to this that hardly any commentary was made upon the negative aspects of cooking. Having been a chef in a restaurant myself for almost 7 years and knowing the harmful effects caused by cooking, I decided to reserve an entire section within the first chapter just for it. In what is to follow, the reader will learn how cooking, more than anything else, has a dramatic effect upon the shape and size of the face, jaws, and teeth. So he talks about this man named Hisashi Suzuki, a professor of anthropology at the University of Tokyo in Japan. And he said, dwelled at length on the physical impact which cooked foods has had not only on advanced Stone Age cultures, but also more recent Japanese aristocrats, as well as in the Amud man and his cave site. He began by pretty much reiterating the same observations that other anthropologists have made in times past, that cooked food in prehistoric times tended to gradually free the chewing muscles from their heavy load needed for the lever action of the jaw. This subsequent weakening of the chewing muscles led to the recession of the subnasal part of the upper face, which is tantamount to the reduction of the upper jaw, which is to say that cooked food greatly altered the entire facial appearance of most prehistoric cultures following Neanderthal demise. I think that's still true to this day. I also think like hormones in different foods are changing people's body types. I've noticed this, I guess, with like males that I've seen. I've noticed from my observation, and it's not like bashing anybody, but I've noticed like I meet a lot of males who barely have any muscle definition, just natural muscle definition. Not like, oh, I'm working on it. They literally just look very soft maybe the food is causing like more estrogen in their body. They're gaining more fat deposits. I don't know. With women, I keep meeting women that have hormonal issues. They're having PCOS. They're having like they feel they're having more masculine, not features, but like testosterone in their body. Even though like everybody has testosterone, estrogen, all of that, but they feel like they have more testosterone in their body. And I just think it's from the food and also the environment. Some people will solely blame it on like meat. I don't blame anything on meat. I just blame it on all foods and chemicals and medications and different things. Because in the past, you had people that ate meat, they were perfectly fine. You had people that ate raw milk, they were perfectly fine. There was a lot of Ayurvedic recipes that had raw milk and it was healing of the body. You had people eating different fruits and they were perfectly fine. But when you take these natural foods and you add whatever synthetic whatever to it, it's all bad. I remember I watched a documentary. I don't know which documentary it was, but it was somewhere in India. The man was going to market. He had a vegetable that he was going to sell, and he literally spray painted the vegetable. He spray painted the color of the vegetable onto it so that it would be dry by the time it went to the market. With food like that, it's no wonder we're getting poisoned on all fronts. That's why I say, just if you can, get it from a farmer or get some land and grow it yourself, or maybe like detox every once in a while. Not extreme, but every once in a while. So let us move to the next chapter, which is how they cleansed the inner man in Egypt and Mesopotamia. It says the origin of the enema. Probably no bit of history could be as interesting and unusual in scope for health-minded folks as the origin of the enema. It began in Egypt many, many centuries ago, and in time took on a near cult-like status throughout the land. The first time I heard of an enema was when I lived with a vegetarian, and she was talking about it. I had never heard of it. I had never heard the word before, but now I know a little bit about it. I've never had one, but I do know people that have had one. There was also this Qigong master that had mentioned the ways that he did enemas as well. So maybe one day we can come across that and talk about it. In fact, as the evidence will show, the anus was undoubtedly second in position only behind the pharaoh himself to be revered and held in such high and noble esteem. Now, that's interesting that he mentions the anus, because when I was reading, it was Mantak Chia. And he's written a lot of books on Qigong. But he was talking about the importance of the anus, and a lot of like the Qigong exercises and massages involve tightening of the anus, which I thought was interesting. Even exercises for men, women, it was unisex. The tightening of the anus, drawing the energy back into you. Now, I know that's kind of uncomfortable for certain people to talk about, but after a while, the more you read about the body, you just become not desensitized to it. You become more accepting and open-minded of just all aspects of the body. You stop learning how to be disgusted by it. You become curious about it. So I thought that was pretty cool. He mentioned that in there. According to the ancient Egyptian legend, the god Thoth became distressed over the many diseases among the ancient people living along the banks of the Nile River. Realizing that most of these ailments were due in part or wholly to obstructed bowels, he sent an incarnation of himself in the form of the, I don't know if it's ibis or ibis, I-B-I-S, to show them what to do for constipation. This crane-like bird has a white body and a black head, and may be seen even today in great numbers. It has a peculiar habit of bending its neck underneath and inserting its long beak into its rectum as if to flush its insides out. Ancient Egyptians witnessing this came up with the idea to do the same thing with their colons as well. I could see that. Sometimes people will be like, why am I not losing any weight? Why am I not losing any weight? Because you're clogged up. I will remember I read the story. It wasn't a story. It was from a book. It was called Tissue Cleansing Through Bowel Management. I only read a little bit of it maybe 3 years ago. And the author wrote and talked about having a client that was so constipated his leg was swelling. And it took a few hours to get everything out of his body in order for the leg to go down, because he was very bloated. When you think about it, you have this toxic waste inside of you. It's going to affect all of your, like, you might get headaches, you might have weight gain, you might have other issues because you're clogged up and it's basically rotting inside of you. Some vegetables are hard to process or they get trapped, like kale. I remember when I was with that vegan family, some of the, maybe two of the children, it was either one or two of the children, was having stomach issues, and the chef, who eventually became the stepmother, realized that it was kale, and that she had to either reduce it or maybe cook it a little bit in order for the child to process the kale. So with fibers, you have to be, mindful. You have to be careful. You don't want too much roughage, but you don't want too little roughage. And you don't want to be excessive, like that boy that took the psyllium husk and he had to go to the hospital to get all of that out of his body. So you just want a nice diet that has a healthy amount of fibers. Make sure you're moisturized on the inside, like drinking plenty of water, stool softening, all of that. I also think like doing exercises like with the anus to strengthen that area could probably help prevent incontinence. But that's just me personally. So popular were enemas that many of the pharaohs had specially appointed physicians who did nothing else but administer enemas to their royal highnesses when occasions required them to. In fact, one such physician had his official court title engraved on the wall of his particular tomb in hieroglyphics, Guardian of the Royal Bowel Movement. Guardians of the Galaxy, Guardian of the Royal Bowel Movement. Oh my goodness. Okay. This peculiar piece of history was mentioned in passing by Jürgen Thorwald in his Science and Secrets of Early Medicine. Undoubtedly, this ancient individual kept things moving through the pharaoh, as his Royal Highness kept the affairs of state moving. So, the rectal, okay. This one is going to sound very intense. I don't know if you've heard of this before. You may have, but this was my first time hearing about this, like ever. Archaeologists Peter F. T. First and Michael D. Coe discuss such ritual enemas in the March 1977 issue of Natural History. They discovered the ritual use of such intoxicating enemas on artifacts dating back from the first millennium AD. The polychrome jar dating from 300 to 700 AD showed a man inserting a syringe into his rectum. The depicted task was carried out by a second man who also had another bulbed enema syringe tucked into his belt. The rectal administrations of such intoxicants had definite advantages over the oral route. It was they basically use mind-altering agents in their enema. So instead of taking it through their mouth, they used it like through the rectum. The rectal, first, there would be considerably less nausea, and secondly, they would be faster acting when taken through the rectum than ingested through the mouth into the gut. Once the absorbed liquids hit the bloodstream from the rectum, they're promptly dispatched to the brain for the desired hallucinogenic effects. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense, because if it's going straight to the brain, that's probably why he talks about like tightening and pulsating the anus to draw up more chi into your body. Okay, this is starting to make a little bit more sense to me now. Mind-stupefying enemas like this are still somewhat common in parts of Middle America. The ups and downs of colonics. Besides an enema, there is also colonic irrigation, which is nothing more than a sophisticated enema using special equipment that creates strong water pressure, exceeding that which can be done with a home enema bag. But to effectively cleanse the system, other techniques must be employed, since the water only reaches the lower intestines. A strong adherence to a vegetable, fruit, and juice diet is advised for maximum benefits from the colonics. Other programs could include a series of herbal and vitamin supplements. So he talks about like some herbs for that would be senna, cascara sagrada, buckthorn, and rhubarb. And it helps with like constipation. But you have to be careful. So one example that he used was this case where 6 people died. They were one of 6 of 36 who were affected by some colonic irrigations, and that's because the place that they went to, it seems, did not clean the equipment properly. They had amoebiasis, amoebiasis, I don't even know, amebiasis. Routine testing of the colonic irrigation device after general cleaning showed excessive contamination with fecal coliform bacteria. So if you are going to ever get a colonic, make sure that it is from a reputable place that is very clean, that knows what they're doing. I feel like you have to make sure they're gentle with you. There's just some things in the body that you just can't be hard with. I'm sorry. The gut, you can't be hard with the gut. The anus, you can't be hard with that. Okay, like you don't want to injure yourself. So you want to be gentle with it. Don't overdo it. Just every once in a while, maybe go get a colonic. And if you don't want to go that route, then just eat some herbs and other things that will help you with that to just naturally flush out your system. Now he's talking about the liver, which is interesting. He actually went more on about the liver than the enemas. In diverse parts of the ancient world, the liver occupied a central position in superstitious or mystical beliefs about man's character and destiny. In Babylon during the 2nd millennium BC, the soul was thought to reside in the liver, and sheep livers were used for divination and prophecy. I'm surprised he didn't really mention the kidneys in this book. I was hoping he would, but he focused on the liver, which is good because I don't know much about the liver as I do the kidneys. In the Bible, Ezekiel 21:21, it's reported that the king of Babylon stood at the parting of the ways, at the head of the 2 ways to use divination. He made his arrows bright. He consulted with images. He looked in the liver. The most common animals used for sacrificial purposes in Babylon and Assyria were sheep. In order to learn the will of the gods whom they worship daily, these ancient cultures would kill a sheep and promptly examine its liver while still warm and fresh. According to the symptoms discovered on the liver, Certain conclusions could be made relative to the observed signs. If they looked favorable, then an undertaking could be commenced at once. If not so favorable, the action would be postponed until a later time. I remember a couple of months ago, there was a YouTuber whose little girl had a black tooth, and she made the little girl eat some cow liver, and the tooth turned back to white. And that's because the liver, if you get it from the right source, like you don't want like a poison liver, just like you don't want poison fruit and stuff. It's very high in K2, helps the D3 absorb into the body, they say. Allegedly, I also met a man recently who, he was, I don't know what he was. He was a vegan, but he started having seizures. Actually, this story is very similar to my godfather. Actually, they basically have the same story. So I'm going to start off with my godfather. My godfather, when his wife, who since passed, was alive, both of them were vegans, but he started having seizures, and she made him eat fish, and the seizures stopped. She was a nutritionist. So something in the fish, it was like vitamin, the omega-3s or whatever. So this man had been a vegan, and I met him like maybe 2 weeks ago, and he started having seizures. So his wife gave him some liver, and that is literally the only thing that stopped his seizures. Like, but a lot of people, they don't think about the liver. Like, when they think about foods, they don't think about the organ meats or anything. They're like, organ meats. But they're very, very nutritious. I know when I was having tooth problems, I was eating liver. I ate it for about a month because my tooth was doing the same thing the little girl's was doing. And it did help with my tooth. I should have kept eating it for real, but I didn't have any time. But I still have that tooth, and the color is back, so yay! But anyway, what was I saying? The most perfect liver inspection, or hepatoscopy, was when the organ of the sacrificial lamb became one with the spirit of the god or gods then being worshipped. The animal's liver could then reflect the disposition and will of said deity in much of the same manner as man might view his image in a mirror. Biological functions of the liver. So, over here he references somebody named Harry Salzer. And Harry Salzer, MD, and a psychiatrist, was one of the first to make distinct connection between liver disturbances and hypoglycemia. In 1965, he delivered a paper on hypoglycemia at the annual convention of the National Medical Association, in which he reported on the 36 major psychiatric, somatic, and neurologic symptoms of 300 hypoglycemia patients. And the paper is called Relative Hypoglycemia as a Cause of Neuropsychiatric Illness. And it was published in the Journal of the National Medical Association, 58, 1217. It's like, I don't know if you can see it. Where is it? Right here. Yeah. If you can see it. So, yeah. Anyway. As one follows this list of symptoms usually associated with hypoglycemia, one is impressed with the fact that at least 1/3 of them have to do with irrational mood or character behaviors. Could this not then suggest that the Babylonians were probably right after all in assuming that the liver directly affected our emotions? I remember I had one of my old friends had mentioned when his mother had gone through a divorce, her kidneys failed. It wasn't the liver, it was the kidneys. But some people will be having organ failures and different things because of something happening in their heart. Some people will be having brain disorders because of some stress that they're holding. I personally think that you hold bitterness, you hold anger, in depression, I think it does something to the brain. Like, you might make yourself more susceptible to, I don't know, something like a brain disorder. Because you're not speaking, you're holding it all in, and that's just stress. Your brain can only process so much. So for the liver, it can only process so much until it can't take it anymore, especially if it's a consistent emotional issue. We're not eating every hour of the day, but we are feeling every hour of the day. Our emotions are our food to our organs. 1, psychiatric. And some of the symptoms, if you're, according to Sauser's list of symptoms for hypoglycemia, psychiatric symptoms are depression, insomnia, anxiety, irritability, crying spells, phobias, lack of concentration, forgetfulness or confusion, unsocial or antisocial behavior, restlessness, previous psychosis, and suicidal tendencies. Damn, that sounds like my whole life. Like, 2, somatic. Exhaustion or fatigue, sweating, tachycardia, tachycardia. I don't know if it's tachi or taki. Anorexia, chronic ingestion or bloating, cold hands or feet, joint pains, obesity and abdominal spasms, and neurologic, headache, tremors, muscle pains and backaches, numbness, muscular twitching or cramps, staggering, fainting, or blackouts and convulsions. I feel like I've had like the first 2 the most. Blackouts, I've only had like 1 blackout when I was very terrified. No, not 1. Actually, I've had like 3 blackouts when I was extremely terrified. That happened throughout my childhood and maybe once in adulthood. Other important functions of the liver not previously cited are as follows. It produces bile, and through the bile salts contained in this digestive secretion, it facilitates the absorption of fat and fat-soluble vitamins. It produces large number of proteins and is the site of synthesis of all plasma proteins except the immunoglobulins. It plays an essential role in fat metabolism. It also plays a central role in the breakdown of steroid hormones such as cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen. It has important storage functions, and among the substances stored are iron, B12, and folic acid, and the detoxification of most of the environmental pollutants we absorb into our bodies takes place in the liver. Now when I'm thinking of the liver, I'm thinking of like a mushroom, because mushrooms absorb, or like frogs. I wonder if they've ever studied, like, done liver studies on frogs, because frogs absorb from the environment, the liver absorbs from the environment. The only tea I've seen that targeted the liver, like in a tea, was this tea called Reishi Liver Health by Bravo Tea. But he has ways to tonify the liver, so I'm going to tell you the names of the herbs so it won't be too long. Arnica, and arnica is good for if you have bruises, healing, probably after surgery, taking some arnica. Beet is also good for energy too, but it'll really cleanse out the liver. You just got to make sure you have the right amount of beet. You can put it in beet juice. Brewer's yeast or beet complex vitamins. Cranberries, guess that will help with like urinary tract infection. Dandelion, vitamin E, which is an antioxidant. Lemon juice, milk thistle seed, that's like one of the top liver herbs. Especially if people are trying to recover from alcoholism. Protein, sage, tannic acid. Tomato juice. Tomato is like lycopene. Guess it helps with like antioxidants or something. Wormwood. I would not take wormwood too often because I mean, you can use wormwood for a parasite cleanse, but I personally wouldn't take it too often. Just take it when you need a good cleanse. Don't take it if you're pregnant, though, because it can be like an abortifacient herb. Zucchini. Yep. And then, so let us briefly go over the next chapter, which is chapter 3. And this one is going to be very interesting because it is about divining or divining for health reasons. And it says ancient Babylonian divining or divining for modern health problems. And in this chapter, I'm just going to briefly incorporate like Mormonism in there, only because I feel like he incorporates it in there as well as I read along. And even though this is a health book, Dr. Heinerman, I don't know if he's still a Mormon, but he was a Mormon. And Dr. Christopher, who is one of my favorite herbalists, he was a Mormon too. I'm still researching about Mormonism, but I'll get along with as I'm reading this. I'm going to read to you first about the divining, since that's what we're talking about, and then I'll go into my little talk about that. So it says, in the previous chapter, there was a lengthy discussion on hepatoscopy, or liver inspection. The ancient Babylonians resorted to this practice, often with the internal organs of freshly sacrificed lambs, in order to learn the mind and will of the gods concerning the routine and extraordinary daily affairs of life. But divining was also used for ascertaining a person's state of health, with one of the most popular forms for this being astrology. A general explanation of the art of divining may be helpful for the reader first of all, before details of the other are given. So he says, the importance of divining in Mesopotamian civilizations is emphasized by the large number of omen collections and related cuneiform, wedge-shaped writing texts that have been preserved. Okay. In operational divination, the temple diviner offered a specific deity the opportunity of directly affecting an object activated by the diviner himself, as in the casting of lots, in the pouring of oil into water, or in producing smoke from a censer. The deity had the power to manipulate the lots, affect the spreading of oil, and change the shape of ascending smoke in order to communicate. In the last example of rising smoke, we find a certain similarity here with that of the old Native American Indian custom of watching for the Great Spirit's response in campfire smoke. Now, lest those of Christian persuasion denounce such a thing as devilish, let me remind them that the God of the Hebrews, Jehovah, frequently worked through the casting of lots to accomplish his own will and purposes among his people. The Bible is replete with instances of this. The use of the lot to determine doubtful questions was much in vogue among ancient Israel. Esther 3:7, Jonah 1:7, and Matthew 27:35. Stones or inscribed tablets or the like were put into a common vessel, and having been shaken, were thrown out or cast upon the ground or some level surface. Now you see this in like other cultures too. There was one, like people that do cowrie shell readings, that'll do that and they'll read the alignment of the cowrie shells. Even though some people are like, oh, it looks easy, I think there's like a system. I don't know how many different categories there are to read it, but I've heard it's pretty extensive. And there's another one, the I Ching. I think that, I don't know if that one will be casting of lots or similar to it, but interesting. or rolling the dice in today's age, except most of us just do it for a game. The act was generally preceded by prayer and was a direct appeal to God to decide the matter by influencing whichever way the lots would fall. Nowhere is there better evidence of this than in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verses 23 through 26, wherein Matthias was chosen to fill the vacancy of the late Judas over that of Barnabas. And they gave forth their lots, and the lot fell upon Matthias, and he was numbered with the other 11 apostles. Even today, among some groups of conservatives practicing Christians, the casting of lots is still used. He mentioned some Hutterian brethren colonies that used it, Anabaptists, Amish. And then he explains in this chapter why it was pleasing to God that they used the lots, different things. The first time I heard of the casting of lots was when I lived with the vegetarian who is also a pastor. She's still like vegetarian vegan. She's still there. But we're still friends. But she was very, very well versed in the Bible. She was a divine scientist, not Scientologist. Not like that's different. That's a whole different sect. But she was over divine science and a lot with the community, but she was very well versed in the Bible. She even told me the story of how she healed a pastor of blindness by spitting in his eye. I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, she was the one that mentioned that, and that's where I first heard of it. So a lot of people, I guess, are now just finding out about it, usually through like TikToks and other social medias. With regard to leomancy, a different kind of interpretation was used. The diviner, who was called the Baru, poured oil into a bowl of water, which he held in his lap. This was done to establish the will of the deity with regard to the country. The movements of the oil in the water, and so it just talks about that. So it's called leconomancy. Leconomancy. I don't know why I can't pronounce words today, but how to cast lots and interpret correctly for personal health knowledge. So what you have to do is you have to get some wood, like little wood bits, about 2 inches long, 1 inch wide, and upon these can be written in pencil so as to be erased later or for reuse. I think if I did this, I wouldn't want to erase it. I would like paint it. I'd make little tiles and paint them so they can be permanent and I can use it for others. Upon these can be written in pencil different types of ailments which most closely resemble the symptoms one may have at the moment or think he or she might have. For instance, if a woman experiences a continual lack of energy and her own doctors have failed to diagnose her condition to her satisfaction, she can resort to the use of lots to have God help her pinpoint what her problems may be. Upon several small pieces of wood, she might then inscribe such maladies as chronic fatigue syndrome, mononucleosis, herpes simplex 2, adrenal insufficiency, hypoglycemia, sleep exhaustion, and lack of iron. These objects would then be placed into a covered receptacle of some type and vigorously shaken, but not before the woman had knelt by her couch, chair, or bedside and petitioned God in words to this effect. And this is what you say if you're going to do it, according to Dr. Heinemann. O God of heaven and earth, thou knowest the needs of thy handmaiden or handman or something. Hear, thou knowest that thy daughter has consulted many different specialists who have been unable to properly diagnose my condition thus far. And as it was the woman of the bloody issue mentioned by the Apostle Luke, who had squandered her wealth in search of medical explanation for her peculiar condition, so have I, thy daughter, exhausted reasonable time and efforts and funds in order to find a simple solution to this my pressing problem of a lack of energy by which I might serve thee more faithfully. Now, O God, I ask thee in faith and humility to bless and consecrate these pieces of wood, upon which I have written various likely ailments which most closely correspond to what I may have. I therefore ask thee, O God, in the name of thy only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, to so ordain that when I pour these bits of wood out in front of me, the one which most nearly fits my particular condition may fall the closest to me, and by this I might obtain a clearer understanding than the doctors consulted thus far were able to provide me with. And now I ask thee for these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Then, while still in the kneeling position, she would shake the receptacle, which could be like a Tupperware bowl or something with a snap-on lid, and then uncovering it, pour it out on the wooden pieces from a height of about a foot or more upon the floor in front of her. Do this on like linoleum, because carpeted rugs is not going to work. Or hardwood and floor. Like anything that has like rugs and everything can affect how it falls. And make sure there's some space. And it talks about making, I guess she's still on her knees. Maybe the one that falls closest to you is what you're dealing with. So you can also use this for cures. Like, what can I do to cure it? But yeah, he goes on and on in this chapter talking about divination and different things. Now, as far as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Heinemann is a Mormon. And my other favorite herbalist, even though he's not an herbalist, but my other favorite herbalist, Dr. Christopher, was a Mormon. I'm still trying to research more about Mormonism. I first became interested in learning more about Mormonism when, and I still feel so bad for this, these missionaries came to my apartment in 2017, 2018, and I ended up laughing at them because they said something. I didn't know they were being serious. I thought they were being funny, and I feel like I offended them. I don't know too much about Mormonism, but from what I've been reading and listening to, I think it's very interesting. I'm not going to become a Mormon. A lot of their beliefs I don't believe, but there are some things that really stand out to me about it that I'm like, I can relate to that. So one thing that stood out to me, especially in Dr. Heinemann's books talking about it, where he incorporates Mormonism into there, is they're more open to things like astrology and the other planets and becoming like a god. From what I've researched, like in regular Christianity, from what I've dealt with, because I grew up in like a Christian home, went to a Christian school, all of that. I'm not like a Christian, but I know how they think. So saying something like, I am going to become like a god, you wouldn't really hear in Christianity, or at least modern day. But the fact that some of them are open to the astrology and other things, I could see how sometimes when you read it, it sounds more like people in the New Age. The more I read about it, it sounds more so New Age than it does like a fundamentalist Christian. Because before I knew more about them, I would classify them as like, oh, it's a branch of Christianity. But now I don't even, I mean, they have like Christian terms in there, but I feel they're almost closer to like more New Age than anything, if that makes any sense. And before I did my research, I'm still researching, but before I did a little bit more research on them, I was always curious, like, what was their relationship between the indigenous people, and why do they keep showing up in their herbal books? Because Dr. Christopher would mention a lot, like talking to like indigenous shamans and bringing up the indigenous people. I just thought it was more because you're living in the Western world and you're living on the land and you're having like encounters with them, the indigenous Americans. But as I was studying, one of the things that they believed was that, according from what I've studied, is that the indigenous Americans were Israelites. And I just thought that was so insane. Not insane because of like, it's insane or anything. I thought it was insane because that's exactly what the Hebrew Israelites were talking about. It's like, I'm like, so y'all have more in common with these Hebrew Israelites than any other group, because you too also believe the indigenous were the Israelites, because the Israelites believed that they were Israelites, that they were the Israelites. I still can't get over the racist. Now, there are some elements of it that, of course, I don't agree with because it's really racist. But before I can make a judgment or a blanket statement, I'm still in the process of learning more about them. So as I learn more about them, it'll probably be easier for me to understand more of Dr. Heinemann's work and his writing, because the Mormonism, his views, you will see through some of his writing a lot. Like sometimes he'll say something and I know it's related to Mormonism, or sometimes he'll say something and it sounds so freaking shady and I still relate it to Mormonism, because I'm like, okay, there's a time and a place. Whereas Dr. Christopher, you really rarely ever heard him talk about Mormonism like that. He just stuck to the herbs. That's why he's always going to be my favorite, for real. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. Another thing that he mentioned was the manna of the Bible, and the Israelites being in the desert and eating off manna. In my mind, I thought manna was bread, but as he was describing it, I was like, I wonder if it was chlorella. And lo and behold, he says, but I propose looking at some of the other often neglected properties of manna, which compare favorably with chlorella. And this is chlorella, it's green. See? It's a blue-green algae, or alga. Exodus 16:13 clearly associates early morning dew with the development of manna, and a little tract on chlorella by Doctors W. H. Lee and M. Rosenbaum, fresh and sweet water is necessary for the multiplication of this unique alga. When the dew had evaporated, there lay a small round thing upon the ground. There are 2 points to remember here about chlorella. It is microscopically small but reproduces at an incredible rate, and it needs plenty of sunlight to proliferate so quickly. The dividing and subdividing of just a single cell in 63 days could generate enough chlorella to equal the volume of this entire planet, believe it or not. Chlorella. I just thought that was so cool. If the manna and stuff in the desert, if that whole situation actually did happen, I could see it being chlorella, because maybe we didn't think it was green because of the illustrations that children would see of manna. It always looks like bread. But did we actually read the description? I don't know. Some of the nutritional aspects of chlorella qualify it as the possible manna which the children of Israel might have consumed for over 4 decades. It's nearly 60% protein. It has 8 essential amino acids. It has vitamins A, most of the B complex groups, vitamins E and K. It has minerals and trace elements. It also has calcium, phosphorus, potassium, iron, iodine, and others. 60% protein content and 20% carbohydrates. This alga's ability to multiply rapidly certainly could have fed the hungry masses. I told you that my experiences with chlorella, they helped me with my skin, it helped me with my cycle, like it helped me a lot. And sometimes if I don't take it on a daily basis, I feel kind of strange. I don't know why. Like I didn't take it today and I still feel kind of strange. Then he goes into this chapter about the dietary laws, like the kosher laws, which I also didn't understand too much until I read this book. He briefly touches on herbal cures from ancient China and how they would examine people, the different methods that they would use to diagnose you. One would be looking at the body, like nonverbal communication, directly questioning the patient, observing the fingertips, examining the foot and the hand, smelling the patient or smelling the sick room, taking the pulse, listening to sound, telepathically communicating, looking at the tongue. And then he talks about a man that lived 256 years, Lee Chung-Young, if I'm pronouncing his name right, and the herbs that he used to live. So some of the herbs were gotu kola, Bodhi root, ginkgo biloba, reishi, dong quai, which I've seen mostly for women, licorice root, konjac, and there's an herbal laxative formula. There's just a bunch of different formulas in here, and he says there was one company that sold it, but I cannot remember their name. Hold on. Albi Imports Limited, 7188 Cura Avenue. Well, let's see if this company still exists, because when I did call one company from his book about oregano oil, it was North American Herb and Spices. So let's see. Let's see.
The international number you dialed is not available with your plan.
Okay, then. Let's try the other number. So, nobody answered anyway. But it was called Albi Imports Limited, if they still exist. I don't know if they do, though. Then, near the final chapters, he talks about the Amazon tribe and having a mother in heaven and all of these different things. He starts going more into like the religious aspect of things and incorporating more Mormonism into there. But I don't know. I just thought it was very interesting. I did learn a lot about this book, and I am going to keep it. I think it's a very good reference book. What was that? Maybe one day I'll make one of the casting of lots. Maybe. I don't know. But if you're interested in getting more information out of here, even though it is a small book, it does have some good information in it. If you're not particularly religious, just kind of gloss over the religious portion. Even though it might not be something I practice, I could still see elements of like indigenous American thought, like New Age thought. It was a pretty good read if you just, damper down on the spiritual side of it. unless that's something that interested you. If you were interested in learning about just the herbs only, then I personally would skip probably chapter 6 and chapter 7, because around those 2 chapters, and he mentions this near the end of the book, he starts going into more like the spiritual side of it. Me, I thought it was interesting. I'm like, that's really interesting. Okay. Especially chapter 7, when it talks about this indigenous American prophet named Seneca. I'm going to have to read more about him too. His name was Handsome Lake, and he was visited by some heavenly messengers and given a layout of different things. In the back of the book, he doesn't have a bibliography, but he does have where you can get more information, but I don't know if these companies still exist anymore. So you can look at it. I don't know if it exists anymore, but here you go. You can screenshot it. So thank you all for watching this video. I hope that you learned a lot, at least about the liver or something. And I'll talk to you all later with another book review. Bye-bye.